We indeed, as Americans, have much to celebrate. The blessings of liberty are bountiful and they are rare. They are bountiful because human liberty conforms to the divine plan. And they are rare because human liberty comes at a high price, in blood, in treasure, and in toil. And liberty remains fragile, ever fragile in the face of the ambitions of proud men and women, and concentrations of power, and encroaching tyrannies of the state. So as we celebrate everything that's wonderful about America, everything that's exceptional about America, we would do good to remember the following teaching of the Lord. To those who use well what they are given, more will be given. But from those who do nothing, even what little they have will be taken away. Now, as we approach a critical point in the history of our state and our national republic, this teaching takes on added significance. For we are rapidly approaching a critical juncture that will determine the prospects for liberty and prosperity, not only for ourselves, but for future generations of Americans and indeed for future generations of men and women around the world. American exceptionalism, America's unique place among the nations, as the sole standard bearer for true freedom and liberty in the world, hangs in the balance. If we do nothing, if we let ourselves slip past the point of no return, what we have will surely be taken away. Now, history demonstrates that more often than not, we can only discern these critical junctures, these points of no return, if you will, in retrospect, if at all. That's because they're often obscured by the mundane and the ordinary events of life, the day-to-day, run-of-the-mill things we all must do. And these are good things. So it's easy to let these points of no return slip past. And the point of no return always comes before the crisis hits. And it's always obscured by the mundane, so we must be ever vigilant that we don't pass it. Or if we do, it is inevitable that we'll go off the abyss. And what is that abyss? It is the end of American exceptionalism. It is the end of America as the last best hope for liberty and prosperity on the planet. We cannot let that happen. We cannot let that happen on our watch. Now, a little trip into history. The Western Roman Empire in 476 AD fell when a Germanic chieftain deposed the last Roman emperor, Romulus Augustus. Just a few hundred years before, in the 2nd century AD, the Roman economy was flourishing, thriving on free trade, low taxes, gold, silver, and bronze coinage. But this did not last. Between the 3rd and 5th centuries, government spending increased rapidly as emperors chose bread and circuses over prosperity and the rule of law. Now, bread and circuses seemed quite nice at the time. Why not give away free food? Rome could afford it, or so it seemed. And who could object to building grand structures and sports stadiums? Everyone loves those, right? Now, the results of such profligacy were entirely predictable, at least in retrospect. Currency debasement, inflation, price controls, and confiscatory tax policies ensued. Indeed, the Roman currency collapsed entirely. The government had to collect taxes in the form of heads of livestock and bushels of wheat, because the currency was worth less than the base metals of which it was made. Desire for free food and entertainment increasingly consumed the masses, even as desire to amass power and wealth by purchasing constituencies consumed the elites. It's a warning for us here in America today. And it turns out that giving away what you can't afford indefinitely may seem like a fine political strategy. But it is neither sustainable nor is it fine in any respect. It is how the largest and most powerful civilization in the world at the time squandered its wealth. But for our purposes here, the real question is this. At what point did out-of-control spending, taxation, and the intervention of the imperial government guarantee Rome's fall? It's hard to say. I think for Rome, the point of no return likely came and went before the fall of the Republic itself, before the transition to empire, from the Republic to empire, fused in the person of the emperor, the law, and quasi-divine status, such that there was no authority above the emperor. That must have been the point of no return, I believe, for Rome. When exactly it was, hard to say. But once they were past that point, there might have been some interludes, there might have been some periods of prosperity, and indeed there were. Mostly when the government got out of the way, when the emperor was not misbehaving. But we do not want America to be held to the caprices and the whims of those in power. That's not how this country is designed. That's not what secures the blessings of liberty and prosperity for Americans today and for future generations. The real point is that there was a point of no return. And a civilization, a country, can only travel down the wrong path for a certain distance before going back becomes impossible. And before going over the abyss, going over the cliff, becomes inevitable. And mind you, no road sign warns point of no return 6 miles or 6 months ahead. But there are more subtle signs, and we see them everywhere. Principally, the pivotal period leading up to that point of no return always features a contest of ideas, a battle of visions between what a civilization traditionally has been based upon and some new vision, usually the development of unaided human reason and theory, sort of like the French Revolution, founded in really nothing solid, not in tradition, but rather abstract concepts in the minds of a few elites. We must also keep in mind that it's not progress just to go forward, despite being on the wrong path. If you're going down the wrong path and you go forward, you're actually going backwards, right? If you want to make progress, real progress, and you're on the wrong path, you have to turn around, and this is borrowing an image from C.S. Lewis, go back up the wrong path, find where you made the wrong turn, and then go down the right path. I believe that's what America needs to do. It doesn't matter, of course, when you're approaching that cliff, whether you're going to go over at 5 miles per hour, or 100 miles per hour, or 700 miles per hour. Going over the cliff, going into the abyss is going over the cliff. You're done. And once you pass that point of no return and the grade of that slope down to the cliff becomes steeper and steeper, there's no turning back. So you can put on the brakes, you can slow things down, as far too many politicians try to do. Just put on the brakes, trim things a little bit here and there. But you're going to pass that point of no return, and it doesn't matter how fast you're going. So the debate really comes down to 2 options for our country: whether to keep going or turn around, whether to continue to concentrate power in the hands of distant bureaucrats, or return responsibilities to the people and unleash the power of free enterprise, to embrace America's special place as the standard bearer of liberty, or reject it, the empty and dangerous promises of benevolent government. And we must ask ourselves, is there room for compromise between these 2 options? Between going down the wrong path or turning back to find the right one? The answer is obvious. No. Now, between the lines of the political back and forth that we see in St. Paul or in Washington, D.C., a battle of ideas is indeed coming into view, plain for all to see. The recent arguments in Washington over the debt ceiling and continuing resolutions have mirrored Minnesota's own recent budget battle. These were 2 major skirmishes in the larger battle of ideas. And at the Capitol in St. Paul and in Washington, D.C., from the governor's office to that of our president, our friends on one side of the debate consistently employ the rhetoric of compromise, of balance, of fairness, and class warfare. They contrast so-called balanced approaches with cuts-only plans. Well, I tell you, and we all know that it is high time to expose such rhetoric as hollow and false. It is time to expose it as sophistry designed to make a big government spread the wealth agenda palatable to the people of Minnesota and America. The people of Minnesota and America will reject it otherwise because they still believe, the vast majority of us still believe, deep down, in the power of free enterprise, in the power of liberty, and in America's exceptional place in the world. Sometimes it's hard to see, but one of the signs that we're approaching the point of no return, and one of the positive signs that gives me hope and buoys me up with optimism that we can save our great nation and its exceptional place in the world, is the fact that so many here today are out celebrating America. The fact that honored to speak and be invited to speak at this great event. The fact that so many Americans are waking up, people that have been politically apathetic, and getting involved, and some of them might not even know why, but they feel something deep down inside. What they feel is their deep-seated American values resonating. Alarm bells going off. All we need to do to turn the ship state around and to get back to the right path is to tap into those values. To be bold, to be loud, to proclaim our principles, and to cause those values to resonate louder so they break up and through all of the lies and sophistry and doublespeak that has covered them over. If we do this, if we reclaim the moral high ground for the cause of individual liberty and limited government, because these are deeply moral matters, we can win the battle of ideas, and we can renew the promise of American exceptionalism for ourselves and for the world. But now we can only do this if we have the courage to stand firm for truth and freedom. And we can only do it if we understand and proclaim the truth about freedom. That is to say, the entire battle of ideas really comes down to two answers to one fundamental question about America's most fundamental value. Only one answer is true. Only one answer constitutes the foundation of America's exceptional, unique position in the world as the standard bearer for Western traditions of individual liberty. The question is this: what is freedom? There are many kinds of freedom, but at its core, across all kinds, what really is freedom? Now, a small but vocal minority of Americans seem to believe that freedom, true freedom, is freedom from responsibility. At least for certain groups of individuals. They don't often think about the expense, the economic liberty of others. We know that freedom from responsibility is not freedom at all. It is servitude, a creeping and dispiriting bondage to whoever or whatever takes on your responsibilities for you. And should this spirit of servitude take hold, it will cripple and destroy us, and we will no longer be men and women capable of keeping the republic, to borrow Benjamin Franklin's phrase. But there is, fortunately, a much deeper understanding of freedom. The freedom of responsibility, freedom for virtue, freedom to strive for the best in our individual humanity. This is the freedom our founding fathers sought, and this is the freedom that makes America exceptional and unique among all nations. It is freedom based on the understanding that what makes us unique and human is not what is common and base, not our fleeting hungers and desires, but instead what is unique and special in man. Our ability to dream, to strive, to achieve, to create. Our ability to deny fleeting desires in pursuit of what is higher and better. Our aspiration to the virtue and goodness inherent in Him who created each of us in His image, even though it fails. It is the freedom to follow dreams, build families, and help neighbors in need voluntarily. To take on duties and obligations and toil to meet them. To succeed, to move from defeat, to the elusive victory and back to defeat, to get back up on your horse, and to move forward, to persevere without government bailouts. Now, this true freedom, the freedom of responsibility, is the only freedom worth having, for it forges each of us, through fires of consequence and through waters of reward, into that stronger stuff that can build lasting prosperity and form the basis for self-government. Now, if we as a nation embrace the false freedom of government largesse over the freedom of personal responsibility, we will quickly pass that point of no return. The approaching abyss will swallow up all that makes America exceptional. If we do not turn back soon, the sacred fire of liberty, to borrow Washington's phrase, will inevitably pass from vivid reality into fading memory. Our children may regard American exceptionalism like they may a fairy tale, and certainly our children's children will know nothing of it at all. Fortunately, again, it is not too late to turn back, to find the right path forward. But we are not likely to discover America's exceptional path in the world again unless we understand where we have been, unless we understand the history and the traditions that led America to its exceptional place as a force for good and a beacon for liberty unique among the nations. Now, we are not often reminded by our teachers of history, who too often get it wrong, that in the England of the forebears of our founding fathers, the authority of the state was not absolute. The power of the sovereign, the power of the king, was hemmed in on all sides and bounded by tradition and custom, hardened over the centuries into a solid rule of law, namely the English common law, an unwritten constitution and body of legal precedent and procedure to which even the king and parliament had to bow. But even as the first American colonists departed the old world for the new, the English common law, that bulwark of freedom and guardian of English liberties, was under heavy assault. And who were the attackers? Well, principally, and first, the absolutist Stuart monarchs, James I, who asserted that law was made by divine right, and that whatever the king said was the law, and there was no recourse to anything higher. And then second, parliamentary absolutists like William Blackstone, who asserted that whatever the majority of Parliament wanted to legislate, it could legislate. Nothing could bound Parliament. Custom, tradition, common law, even divine law notwithstanding. And these early English absolutists, just like today's big government statists, implicitly rejected a key Judeo-Christian concept that is absolutely indispensable to freedom. A concept that our founding fathers embraced. The idea that a higher divine law is set above human law in the state, limiting the state's power and protecting individual liberty. The substance of that higher law was the basis for English liberty, and it is the basis for the liberties we enjoy in America. It comes in the form of moral precepts and principles, specifically that each and every individual human is fashioned in the image of the Creator and is sacred and inherently valuable. That the freedom of each individual is likewise sacred and inherently valuable. That individuals should not be subjected to undue oppression and must be protected from unwarranted compulsion by the state. And that a society organized by free decisions from the bottom up, not from the top down, through voluntary associations, through organic institutions like families and neighborhoods and organizations, trade organizations, and free business enterprises. These kinds of national organizations are bulwarks against tyranny as long as they are freely entered, as long as they are free and based on concepts and precepts of human liberty. This view both respects the sacred value of human liberty and prevents dangerous accumulations of power in the state. Now, founding fathers were a product of all of this. They're a product of this English tradition, of these Judeo-Christian values, and they understood well that embracing the absolute supremacy of the Parliament or the king would deprive liberty of its sacred status and undermine all of the traditional bulwarks against encroachments on liberty. So they resisted parliamentary absolutism. They resisted the absolutism that was sweeping over England in the 18th century. And they fought a war of independence in the United States, here in America, to guarantee that the sacred light of liberty would shine forth and light the path to prosperity for future generations of Americans, even though it would not do so any longer in England. And having shed blood in an epic battle to preserve their sacred liberty and traditional rights, our founding fathers soon set to work on another equally critical and important task, establishing a new regime of liberty under the law. And to do that, and having witnessed the slow erosion of English liberties, and then finally the sweeping away of English liberties in the old country, they developed a unique method. They wrote a concise, clear, and durable written constitution enshrining the most important English traditional liberties, guarding our freedoms, so long as we stick to its plain meaning and don't stray from the precepts that underlie it. Our American Constitution is the culmination of the best of Western traditions of liberty, built directly on the firm foundation of uniquely Judeo-Christian values, specifically that no man is divine, that no man is above the law, and that all men are created in God's image, possessed of equal and sacred dignity and rights, so that no ruler can treat his fellow man as merely an animal or an object or a tool for the state. So what exactly do we mean by American exceptionalism, given that bit of history? We mean that America is an exceptional force for good in the world, because the torch of freedom, the beacon of light and truth, has been passed and entrusted to us, passed from England to us. Snuffed out in England, we hold it high. We are the keepers of the sacred fire of liberty. We are the keepers of the best Western traditions of freedom, and not just for ourselves, but for the world. America is an inspiration to the oppressed. It is hope to victims of tyranny. It is a model for nations seeking the blessings of liberty for themselves. And it is the last truly free society on earth, provided we can keep it. And so it's easy to see that American exceptionalism, being as it is, a trust of the best of the Western traditions of liberty, comes with very great responsibilities as well, exceptional responsibilities. It is our duty to keep that sacred fire of liberty burning bright. And to that end, we must never forget that American exceptionalism, that liberty, is not compatible with powerful, large, or centralized government. It is not compatible with high taxes. It is not compatible with top-down centralized planning. It is only compatible with a society that is built by free decisions and free associations. It is not compatible with government that interferes too much in the lives of its people or regulates too much. It is not compatible with government that spends too much. Government spending is an extension of government power. The more the government spends, the smaller the sphere of influence remains for the private sector, for private individuals, for free enterprise, for all the things that liberty brings and the prosperity and blessings that liberty bestows upon us. Indeed, our founding fathers and their compatriots, they fought the war of independence to resist the very notion of the supreme and absolute state. And yet, we see it creeping up here in America, despite the bulwarks of the Constitution, despite all the efforts of the founders. We see a centralized and authoritarian state rising. We see attempts to increase the size and scope of government, to spread wealth, all well intended. But whenever humans rely solely on their reason and reject the assent over generations of custom and tradition, folly will come. Because not one of us is smart enough to direct an economy, is smart enough to tell others what would be best for them to do. Each one of us, rather, has sacred value and sacred liberty to determine for ourselves what we want to do with our lives, how we want to build our families, to enter into business ventures and contracts, to worship God as we see fit. So as the federal government threatens to overstep its constitutional boundaries, for example, in the name of centrally planned health care, as it intervenes more and more into myriad aspects of our economic lives and our family lives, and as federal deficit spending increases wildly, as Minnesota and states across the nation, due to out-of-control spending, face structural deficits that will repeat, and in the face of a national debt that is exceeding $15 trillion and unfunded liabilities in the amount of $100 trillion, which is more than the entire money supply of the entire world. All the money in the entire world is less than the unfunded liabilities of our federal government right now. As we see all of this, our duty to change course before we pass the point of no return becomes all the more clear and all the more pressing. Now, I have witnessed myself, and I'm sure many of you have too, what happens in societies that reject the moral imperative of human liberty. I saw this in my trips for study and for work to China and to Taiwan. And one particular anecdote comes to mind. I was in Beijing prior to the Olympics there, and we frequented a small bar and grill owned by a fledgling Chinese entrepreneur. It's a small place down a traditional Chinese hutong alley off the street, 4th Ring Road out from the center of Beijing. And this owner was incredibly proud of what he had created. He had created something in China, and it was profitable. And he had customers and clientele and repeat customers, and it was his livelihood, and it gave him purpose. Then, after we hadn't gone to that restaurant for about 2 weeks, we came back, and I saw the owner. He was standing next to a pile of rubble. The pile of rubble was his former business. Just 2 weeks ago, it had been standing there. He looked dejected. I walked up to him and asked him what had happened. He told me that the business, his livelihood, his dream, had been cleared away by the Chinese government on 2 weeks' notice to make room for Olympic greensmiths. I asked him if he had received compensation. Not yet, was his reply. I asked him when he expected to receive compensation. He just shook his head. Most compensation for takings in China, a large percentage of them are embezzled. This corruption is rampant. Then I asked him if he planned to reopen his restaurant somewhere else, or there, or well, couldn't do it there, it was green space. open it somewhere else, or open a new business. He answered with deafening silence as he looked at the ground. He would not. And the fatalism and the inevitability on his face was bone-chilling. His spirit had been crushed. He learned too late that a government with power to give also has the power to take. He learned too late just how fragile liberty is when it is all by itself and not protected by bulwarks of tradition and custom and constitution. We must learn from the lessons of folks like this Chinese entrepreneur and make sure that does not come to pass here in America. A large and benevolent government may be good for just a little bit of time, but it will turn bad, because that is human nature. That's what our founders understood. So we must not let the sacred liberty burn out, and we must not pass the point of no return. So how do we do that? In order to turn around and go back and find that right path forward, to maintain the traditions of liberty that make America exceptional, we must boldly stand up for our founding principles. We must focus our energies on issues and discourse connected to the preservation of the true meaning of freedom. Specifically, we must limit the size of government and reduce spending. We must let Americans keep more of what they earn, so they can govern themselves and pursue their dreams and build their families as they see fit. We must reject top-down planning that forces people to live in a particular way because a particular set of elites think it's better for the planet or better for some end. We must protect natural institutions like the family, because families are little governments unto themselves, without which small government is impossible. They are bulwarks against tyranny. And we must protect the sanctity of human life, because we know that liberty is only meaningful because life is meaningful and sacred. And if life is not meaningful and sacred, then there's no point to liberty either. And we must also defend the Constitution, our greatest bulwark against the encroachments of tyranny on our liberties. We must not allow judges to write into the Constitution between the lines, to see things that are not there, to create a blank page that they can fill with whatever they think is best. We must not allow them to find in their intelligence and wisdom what is fundamental for Americans. Rather, we know that what is fundamental comes up from our tradition, through England, through Western civilization, into our Constitution, studied by our founding fathers. Those things are fundamental. The Bill of Rights, it's all in there. And the principles that underlie the Constitution, that's what's fundamental. The job of a lawyer, as a lawyer I know this, is not to create things when you're reading a document. It's simply to read it and apply it. And sometimes you'll hear people say, well, the Constitution is so old, how can it possibly be applied to technologies of today, and et cetera, et cetera. No. That's why it is such a strong Constitution, because it's brief. 4,400 approximately words, I believe. It is brief, and it is concise and strong, and is able to apply to a myriad of situations, to apply to any kind of technology, anything we might develop, because it's general, and because it's strong, and because it's built upon traditions that were developed by the assent of millions of people over centuries and generations. Remember, custom and tradition is a form of consent over time. Now, this is a bold list of things I just went through, but we must be bold, for time is short. We don't know how far we have to go or how long we have to go until we reach that point of no return. There is not time for half measures. We must reach past the surface of the political back and forth and grasp the true values at stake. Understand what's truly going on so that we can take the right side and champion the cause of liberty and freedom. Now, very quickly, the political back and forth over the budget this spring and summer in St. Paul was not just a disagreement about how much to spend. And the recent fights in Washington over the debt ceiling and continuing resolutions weren't either. All the political wrangling is about something much, much deeper. It's about what kind of freedom we Americans aspire to. It's about what kind of freedom makes America exceptional. And some of our friends on the other side of the debate seem to believe that Americans aspire simply to be the most comfortable people that ever lived. People who are able to sate their current desires at the expense of our very humanity and the prosperity of future generations. Well, my friends, those friends are not right. The vast majority of Minnesotans, the vast majority of Americans still aspire to greatness and to goodness, to being the most free and productive society in the world, to shining the light of truth and liberty as a beacon on a high hill for all nations to see. The time for half measures and frail words is over, and we must turn back now. And the course correction, it starts right here. It starts right here with all of us. We must speak the truth, stand up boldly for our founding principles and traditions, and if we do that, we can direct the national debate. We can win the battle of ideas, and we can lead our country back to the right path of liberty, to free enterprise, to personal responsibility, and we can and we must lead the journey back to America's exceptional path forward, to America's exceptional place as the last, best beacon of liberty among all the nations. Evidence bound that Americans and Minnesotans are hungry to join us on this journey. All across the country, Americans are waking up to the danger. Americans care deeply about liberty and human flourishing. And there's also something deep inside the American spirit that calls us to excel. It is our responsibility, it is our duty to make that possible. That's why we're all here today, celebrating America. That's why I ran for public office. That's why I'm committed to winning this battle of ideas. And that's why I thank each and every one of you for what you have done and urge you to continue and join me in that fight. Thank you all very much, and God bless.
Was I right? Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Doug. And real briefly, everybody got a red ticket.